Hello everyone and welcome back to Tasman Talk, back on a Friday evening. It is 6 p.m. here in Melbourne. It is the 26th of June 2020. I'm Tim Wilms, Editor-in-Chief of the Unshackled.
And it is 8 p.m. here in Auckland, and it's good to be back on the Friday. And we are live on the Right Minds YouTube channel, and we are also streaming on the the stream is embedded on the BFD as it usually is, and it is good to see everybody streaming into the chat now. And we are just a couple of minutes late due to some technical issues that were just resolved, so we will be on with the show any minute.
Yep, and we are also live on the Unshackled YouTube channel, which I remind everyone is monetized, so you can directly send through a super chat in the live chat. You've just got to go press on the $sign in the chat area, type in your amount and the message that you want to read out as well. I noticed that there's people there, but the conversation hasn't started yet, so please make yourself known in there. I thought we should start off with some, non-COVID news, some good news. Because
we are sadly back to COVID news again. I think we had maybe a 1 week break.
But sport is back, and that takes people's minds off the misery of the current state of things. Although I can't say that AFL has done that, given that the first round that they resumed, they all took the knee to support Black Lives Matter, and Channel 9 fired veteran AFL commentator pundit Sam Newman for criticizing the players kneeling and calling George Floyd a piece of shit. Sam Newman was one of the co-hosts of The Footy Show for 25 years, known as larrikin, politically incorrect, had no time for PC feminists or sensitivities. So he's parted way with Channel 9 now. And because Melbourne, parts of Melbourne have seen outbreaks and spikes, it has meant that the AFL return to crowds has been derailed. One of the Essendon-Melbourne game had to be cancelled because one of their players, Conor McGregor, after testing negative to coronavirus, he then tested positive, so they had to cancel the game. Then he tested negative again. And there's now talk that some of the teams might go to a playing bubble in Perth. I know it's with Super Rugby Aotearoa. I think I said it right tonight.
Getting closer.
Stadium still packed?
I believe so. No trouble selling out sports here in New Zealand. We have had the return of COVID-19. We had 2 cases when we talked last Tuesday, and that's gone up to 14 cases. So we've had multiple cases almost every single day, and all of them are in isolation though, or supposedly have been in isolation and quarantine the whole time. So there should be no community spread. There should be nothing like that happening. Or so the authorities tell us, that everything is absolutely under control, even though it's been stuff up after stuff up in terms of people having left quarantine, getting lost, not being tracked properly, and not being able to tell how many people had been tested in quarantine, not being able to see. So initially we were told everyone would be tested on the 3rd day, and then on the 14th day when they left quarantine, that testing wasn't happening. So that's been the news in New Zealand over the past week. But it has resulted in just the 14 cases, all of them returning citizens coming back home and being testing positive while still being in isolation. So who knows?
Well, you're still at alert level 1, which means that everything's back to normal, except you can't leave New Zealand. I just
it's like a Hotel California.
yeah.
You can check out, but you
I,
can never
I,
leave.
I just want to keep on the sports theme for a
Yeah.
moment because well, there's been talk about this trans-Tasman bubble for a while. It seems to be more just a thought bubble that's been bubbling along.
Yeah,
But
everybody's really hoping it will happen, but now there's talk of it basically not happening this year.
But by 2023, there is going to be a women's soccer trans-Tasman bubble with Australia and New Zealand's joint bid to host the 2023 FIFA Women's World Cup being successful. And it's been, well, the talk of sports news today. I noticed that when it was being read out, because I don't know who the head of FIFA is at the moment. I hope, fingers crossed, he doesn't turn out to be corrupt like a lot of them in the past. But they always have this this sort of Swiss French accent, and they slow it down. The World Cup will be hosted by, and then pauses, dramatic pause, Australia and New Zealand, and it was. Obviously, it was broadcast online, and all the FFA, Football Federation Australia, all the head honchos and the players were in a room. They had their seats all socially distanced separately, but as soon as they were announced as the winners, they all jumped up and hugged each other and breached social distancing.
It is hilarious to see. To just see that happening everywhere. It's not so much of a deal in New Zealand because there is no more social distancing in New Zealand, so you don't have these hypocritical moments at all because we don't have to worry about social distancing at all. But to see it happening overseas is quite funny, and I think it feels very different for a New Zealander to be looking at the rest of the world and to be looking at these scenes, and then to see all of you foreigners panicking. Like, oh no, there's people all together, and in New Zealand that's a normal thing. So it takes a minute for it to click over, like, oh yes, in all of these other places people are not supposed to be together unless they're protesting for BLM, then it's okay, but otherwise they shouldn't.
And the English Premier League resumed the past couple of weeks, and when it was suspended at the beginning of March, Liverpool were on the cusp of winning their first English Premier League title and their first English title in 30 years. And a lot of people did laugh that they'd been waiting 30 years, Liverpool fans, and then the season was suspended, but it was resumed. And with my team, Chelsea, beating Manchester City last night, Liverpool have secured the title, and all the Liverpool fans have been outside celebrating Anfield, their home ground. Football fans are still barred from attending games, but they're all together, letting off flares, clearly not socially distancing. But UK is on the path to opening everything up again, and they've let the BLM run rampant, so it's only fair that the football lads get to celebrate. And these Liverpool fans have been waiting 30 years for their team to win a title.
Been locked in their houses for 30 years waiting to go outside.
So if they do die of coronavirus now, they'll die happy knowing that they live to see Liverpool win again.
And it is a strange world where I do believe it was almost a few months ago now where we were talking about the sports. At least I was mentioning the sports sort of being. This was a few weeks ago. The sports being sort of the new secular religion, and this is what. And so it's kind of interesting to see these two separate groups for completely different reasons be out breaching the social distancing guidelines that everyone else has to abide by and that they would normally abide by, except when they're engaging in these activities such as their sports or their virtue signaling, protest, whatever it may be. They're engaging in a sort of a form of religious activity, and that makes it okay.
Well, the AFL and the soccer players, they're still in their huddles, grabbing each other after goal celebrations and that. And I think that's why the authorities needed to suspend sport, because they didn't want those images beamed in to homes when they're trying to encourage people to social distance. And also didn't like the fact, as we've seen with the Liverpool fans, that sport brings joy and people together like other things as well.
Yeah, definitely the case. We have, meanwhile, in New Zealand, the one thing that happened while the it was sort of last week, and I'm trying to remember if it was before last week's show, that the it had been announced the army was taking over the border controls in New Zealand, and I believe that what kind of happened around the day after, maybe when we were discussing the 2 new cases. So it was announced that the Ministry of Health had stuffed up, they had made a mistake, and so they were going to be bringing in the army to take control of the borders, and this hadn't happened since World War II. This is a big announcement, and good objections from people as well. The army should not be in charge of the borders, that this was supposed to be a health issue, and the Ministry of Health should be competent enough to deal with it. And they made a big deal about it. And then we found out that supposedly the army had actually been running the border for the past month.
So they had been managing hotel quarantine already?
Yes, so they had already had military personnel engaged in managing quarantine, and don't really know the guy's name or what military department he was from, but one of New Zealand's don't think he was a general, maybe he was. Again, he sort of appeared in the news one day, like, he's the guy who's supposed to be running the border, and then the next day I was like, oh no, he'd been running the border for the past month, and then his name disappeared. And that had been the case. So it was a case of, the Ministry of Health can't manage the border, so we need to bring in the army. But then the army was already managing the borders, and now we can't bring in anybody else. Now we need to just forget about this situation and pretend that everything's okay. Everything's fine. It's under control.
Doesn't have because we have the Australian Border Force, which manages both customs and also community or follow up on immigration. Visa overstayers. It's basically a police force to deal with immigration and border security. Though it was exposed during the early days of the pandemic that they didn't have a biosecurity division. And that's why we had the Ruby Princess disaster in New South Wales, where it was allowed to dock by Border Force based on advice from the New South Wales Health Department. And also they weren't enforcing social distancing on newly returned travellers because they didn't see it was their job. Given that, there was in early March such outrage that people were just allowed to come back in, were told to self-isolate on their own. So we've had mandatory hotel quarantine since then. In New South Wales, it was managed by the military, but in Victoria, we had private or contract security guards. And what's happened is that some of them have contracted it from the hotel.
Of course.
Those in quarantine in hotels. And they've gone home and given it to family members as well. So they were going to bring in the ADF, the Victorian government, though as they were approaching the border from New South Wales, it was revised its request for the Defence Force. Victorian government, they initially requested boots on the ground support, but they want to focus more on their testing blitz. But they are needed. Well, in my opinion, it's unclear from this whether they're still going to manage hotel quarantine. It's also been revealed that many in hotel quarantine returning travellers. I can't believe we're still getting return travellers. Where have they been this whole time? It was back in March you were told to get back to Australia. But
I think there's a lot of people who just thought, we'll wait a couple of weeks and it'll blow over, or they had some kind of work overseas and just wanted to stay there. At the end of the day, someone who is a citizen does have a right to return to their country. At least that's something that I hold to. That is,
Oh
not
yes, I'm
everybody's
not
happy. Not
disagreeing with
everybody is
that.
happy with that. Yeah, being a bit thick. They should be paying, and that's the big issue. New Zealand, the taxpayers paying for it, but really anybody who's coming back should be paying for their own quarantine.
Especially
It's
now.
perfectly exactly, especially now, and they should be definitely be allowed to come back in. Quarantine has a long history of people, being required to quarantine before being able to come back in. That's perfectly fine. The costs are an issue there, and a lot of people complaining as well. There's no mandatory testing. So I referred to this a little bit earlier, where they were claiming people were going to get tested.
Yeah, that's the
Either
same
weren't even
here.
trying to test them, or people were. We've had. I should know the number. I think 71 is a number I saw today. 71 people who have not been tested at all and have finished their 14-day quarantine and gone off. And people have complained that testing should be compulsory, but that's a difficult one, I think, as well, because you're going to have to override the Bill of Rights,
Yeah,
which
you
lets people
can't
use
swab
medical treatment.
people
Yeah,
against
against
their
their will.
will.
But there are a lot of people who want to do that. I'm like, no, no. It is absolutely, we should be maintaining the Bill of Rights. They're the only thing that's legitimate is the quarantine, and if they've been quarantined for the correct period, then that should be good enough. And it's a detention for however long, and it's been set to 14 days for this. That's fine. They could have made it longer, but that's what it is. So no, people shouldn't have to be tested, and it seems like most people are. 71 is out of thousands of people who have returned the last few weeks, but I think a lot of different people are going to have different opinions on that. But what I've been hearing from that does not cause any concern for me, because that is people's rights to refuse any kind of medical. This is not necessarily medical intervention, but it's a procedure, a medical procedure. Yeah.
Yeah, the same as you can't forcibly vaccine people. You can't medicate people against their will. The statistic in Victoria is 3 in 10 travellers currently residing in Victoria's quarantine hotels are refusing testing. But the reason why there's that 14-day quarantine is because that's how long it takes to recover from the coronavirus. So that's the average, and so it's fingers crossed that if they're in that hotel quarantine for 14 days, if they did have the virus, then they'll have recovered by then.
Yeah, or with the average incubation time, supposedly 14 days will cover it, but then it gets difficult if the isolation is not properly managed, which people are saying in these hotels, everyone's like to
Which is
mingle.
the case
You
in
could be catching it
Victoria.
on your last day, and whether you're tested or not, it's not going to matter, because you're not going to test positive anyway, and you leave the hotel and off. Then you've got community spread, and you're going to notice 2 weeks later. That's what could be happening. It seems though like it's not as contagious as initially thought, and so they're not actually that worried. It's not that easily to spread it. But we're going to find out here in New Zealand, which will be interesting. It's something we can speculate about now, but the community spread from people leaving isolation hasn't happened yet, so we shall see who's right on that.
Well, back in Victoria, since now we've had our 10th consecutive day of double-digit new coronavirus cases. There were 30 today. The daily press conference from either Premier Chairman Dan Andrews or the Health Minister Jenny Mikakos or the Chief Medical Officer Brett Sutton, Chief Health Officer he's called in Victoria, or the Deputy Chief Health Officer Annalise Van Diemen, and you might remember she was the one who tweeted on the anniversary of Captain Cook's landing at Botany Bay about foreigners spreading disease to Australia. Was it COVID or Captain Cook? And Daniel Andrews defended her, saying it was a day off, and sort of like she has a day off to tweet.
Yes.
which is, well, in hindsight now, they all should have been working harder to it seems to me that because you remember that Victoria had the most draconian lockdown of many state and territories, we were basically under house arrest, and it's been exposed now that that their testing was behind. Obviously, we've seen the mismanagement in the hotel quarantine, but also managing the cluster outbreaks, as it's been called. I mentioned Cedar Meats, that halal slaughterhouse. There was an end of Ramadan event in Coburg in the inner north. That's caused a cluster. There's now 2 cases linked to a Coles distribution centre in Melbourne's west. And Daniel Andrews, he confirmed, well, he blamed it initially on the Saturday, not on the Black Lives Matter protesters, even though one who tested positive there, I should say, worked a shift at a H&M store, which had to be closed, and they've infected 4 others. So you could basically call that a cluster. He blamed large family gatherings, but he also revealed that people who tested positive and were told to self-isolate had not been doing that. And I was like, hang on, you first us all under house arrest, threatening us with fines, and also mandating small businesses shut down for longer than any state and territory, and you weren't even enforcing the self-isolation for those who had test positive or had been directed to self-isolate. What the hell were you doing?
And that, this is, I suppose, the kind of inconsistent behavior that you are always going to get from people who like power too much and have absolutely no competency to, they shouldn't be there.
It seems to me, on reflection, that the Andrews government strategy was lock everyone up and just hope that that will cover up any shortcomings that we have, which it hasn't. And
so you basically, Victoria's had the most damage done to it out of the Australian states, and continues to because of the because of the lockdown and because of the incompetence.
We've got the interactive map of the hotspots by local government area or council area. As you know, Australian health departments love the infographics and interactive maps. So there is the hotspots there in the northwest of Melbourne. The bright red means that that's a severe outbreak. So City of Hume, 25. City of Brimbank, 19. The grey up here, that's rural Victoria. There is the grey means that there's no active cases. In the southeast where I reside, worst is City of Casey with 16 active cases. But where I actually live, City of Frankston, no active cases, which is fantastic. And want to keep it that way. But these red areas, they're also heavily ethnic and multicultural areas. And the Andrews government has basically admitted that, yes, that's where the clusters are, and we need to do more a cultural community outreach in languages other than English.
Yes, well, I suppose the benefits of multiculturalism are incredibly obvious right now.
Even Andrew Bolt put it bluntly, calling Melbourne's second wave due to multiculturalism, and his take on the slogan "diversity is our strength" was "diversity is death," which was quite grim. We've only had one new coronavirus death in Australia, which was in Victoria. A man in his 80s died this week, and there was also a death in New South Wales in April that was revised as a coronavirus death. So our tally stands at 104. We're back over 500 active cases in Australia, 533. Though if you have a look at our federal health infographic, you can see that we still only have 2 in intensive care and 16 in hospital, a 0.3% positive rate. And if you still look at our coronavirus curve, you can see it was huge at the end of March, but you can see the spike there. It's still pretty low.
Yeah. Yeah, there's nothing that looks too serious there, and I suppose that's the good news. Amidst the worst attempts by the government to make things worse, things are not getting a huge amount worse. They seem to even be bad at making things worse. So there's the silver lining, I suppose.
And Andrews knows now that he can't go to a second lockdown. You can only wreck the economy once. And well, we've been talking about previously. He's signed up to China's One Belt, One Road global infrastructure program, and there was a lot of talk about. Well, his treasurer said that the infrastructure program was going to help kickstart the state's economic recovery, but I think a second lockdown in Victoria and the economic devastation, I don't think even China could afford to pick up the tab for that, especially
once for the right price. If you hand over everything, they might do it.
They've had their second outbreak in Beijing, which was traced to a wet market as well. But the likely, this is what Daniel Andrews has hinted at, is regional lockdowns, those red areas. And because he had to suspend some of the relaxations that were due on June 22nd. So cafes, restaurants, pubs, they remain at a limit of 20 patrons. Cinemas and gyms were still allowed to reopen, so was the ski and camping season, but outdoor gatherings have been reduced to 10, and visitors to your home have been reduced to 5, all down from 20, though he has hinted that regional Victoria and I shall confidently say City of Frankston, if there's no active cases, they can relax sooner, so we could have larger house gatherings and businesses.
As long as you don't bring people in from the multicultural hotspots, then you'll be okay. So it'll be like racially segregated gatherings only.
What does that mean? That the only people that you're allowed to invite to your house that could be interpreted as a white supremacist gathering?
Yeah, so you may be out of luck there. There may be protests against the regional separation there. Although
diverse gatherings.
It's a diverse gathering. Yeah. Although in America, with the BLM protests, it ended up being quite popular in the end. Even in the last days of Chaz. They did have lots of segregation going on, so they might be okay with it now. You never know.
Well, Victoria's become a national pariah and laughingstock in the other states and territories, and even though state of New South Wales won't close the border with Victoria, they've advised businesses in the tourist spots in the south. They're basically given them the green light to refuse service to Victorian tourists. And,
now so it begins.
And Melburnians are not allowed to purchase tickets to NRL games now. So I wonder if there'll be signs, Victorians not welcome here, whether they'll have to sit at the back of the bus or have a separate Victorian drinking fountain.
Yeah, that'll be good. Or you have to do what they do, and I remember this when I was in Israel visiting the West Bank. If you've got an Israeli car or a rental car with a number plate, you've got to leave it on one side of the border and park it there, because else people will throw rocks at your car. So then you leave your car on your side of the border and you call an Arab taxi and they pick you up and they drive you across the border. So you do that, like if you come with you leave your Victorian car at the border and get somebody in a New South Wales number plate to go and pick you up and drive you across. So it's he could be getting serious.
It reminds me of that. Well, it's that now banned British character sketch show, League of Gentlemen, the local store. Are you local? Oh, this is a local store for local people. This would be shop owners in New South Wales about Victorians.
Definitely. Before we move too heavily into the other politics, we do have one final wrap up here for COVID-19. We have our health minister David Parker, who's featured on the show a number of times for going out mountain biking during the lockdown period. He went, when everyone was supposed to be locked to their homes. He tried to move house, and he didn't really turn up for work that much either. He was basically shoved to the back. So even though he was the health minister, he was not allowed to show up at any of the press conferences. He was finally interviewed, and I sent you the clip if you'll bring that up now.
Yeah,
but
I'll play it now.
For all of the debacles that we've been talked about, he was asked, whose fault is it, and has somebody taken responsibility? And well, you'll just have to listen to what he says.
General has accepted that the protocol wasn't being followed. He has accepted responsibility for that and has set about putting it right.
David Clark throwing Ashley Bloomfield under the bus while he was standing diligently behind him. A brutal move from a health minister refusing to take any responsibility.
Why don't you take some responsibility?
So the guy who's been doing his job has been thrown under the bus by the guy who hasn't been doing his job.
Yeah, which sounds that's typical politicians for you. It's not our fault. It's some sort of admin error.
Yeah, exactly. So there have been bipartisan calls for him to resign, and he still has his job. The rumors that are most likely true are that the reason he has his job is because there's nobody else in the Labour Party who could take it. They don't have enough talent on the bench, and because he's got the word doctor in front of his name, supposedly he has a doctorate anyway.
Well, is he a medical doctor or a doctor of something else?
I don't know. I would question. I'm actually not sure, and I'm not sure anybody else is. But because he's supposedly got a doctorate in front of his name, or behind it, wherever he's put the letters, that makes him qualified to be the health minister, and there's nobody else who can take the portfolio. So that's why he hasn't been. That's the only reason he hasn't been fired yet.
We've got a super chat in the Unshackled YouTube chat from Kieran Powdrill, who's one of your Right Minds crew. He sent through $2 New Zealand. Thank you for. It translates to Australian $1.80. He says, read Art of the Deal and Grow a Beard, 5H33PH P5H at 993R. What's that code?
No idea.
Okay. I hope I didn't read out something.
That's going to come back to bite you. Who knows? Yes, we
might be some sort of activation code for something.
Exactly. One day Tim is going to grow a beard. I'm sure it's going to happen one day, Tim. We'll keep pestering him.
Look at my... I can't really...
Are you doing a mullet?
Yeah.
Oh, no. We can't have that. No.
Even though the hairdressers have been open all throughout the pandemic, I still haven't bothered to get one because I hate getting one at the best of times. But before we move on from, Victoria's spike has seen a second wave of panic buying. It began in Melbourne hotspots, toilet paper and paper towels, but now it's spread nationwide, even though it's only in Melbourne's hotspots. So both the major supermarket chains, Woolworths and Coles, they've reintroduced some purchase limits. So nationwide, a limit of 2 packs per customer per shop of paper towels and toilet paper. Victoria only hand sanitizer, flour, sugar, pasta, mince, long life milk, eggs, and rice. And all of us are just perplexed. You didn't learn from the first time that it was unnecessary, the panic buying, because the supermarkets remained open. It's only at the worst, it's only going to be local government area lockdowns, and even when Victorians were under house arrest, you could still go to the supermarket. They were all open.
You can still get toilet paper. Yeah.
And if it's the same people, haven't you still got like 6 months worth of supply of toilet paper from the last panic buying?
Last time I was at the supermarket here in New Zealand, they had an entire aisle dedicated to the toilet paper simply because they had ordered too much. So there was like huge stacks to the ceiling of toilet paper still waiting here in New Zealand. But the recent COVID cases in isolation haven't resulted in panic buying, but what they've resulted in is people trying to get panic tested. So there are long queues in many places, especially in Auckland, like that just traffic jams all day long.
Same here in Melbourne.
People trying to get tests.
Testing sites have actually had to close before they've been able to be open because they've run out of tests, which shows it's another bungle by the Victorian health authorities. And the most hilarious thing about, they've got some testing facilities outside shopping centres, Chadstone in the south and High Point in the inner north. People have got tested, but then gone in and shopped.
Yeah, it keeps getting funnier. I do feel like it's going to be interesting looking back at what's happened and the behavior, but I'm not really sure.
7 News, they interviewed some of those who'd queued up for hours for COVID testing, and a lot of Karens in the queue freaking out about the second wave.
Somebody in my chat has figured out the secret code that you read out, by the way.
Yes, I've read it now. Is that really? You're really not allowed to say that on YouTube.
I don't know. Anyway, I missed it. Anyway, I can see it now. We had a poll.
Oh, I just want to finish off Corona in Australia because we had
more Corona.
Our national cabinet meeting today, which of course the Melbourne hotspots were the key topic of discussion. Scott Morrison came out afterwards with the chief medical officer, Professor Brendan Murphy, said that the national economic reopening is still on track. Small businesses will be allowed a 2 square meter per person rule rather than the 4 square meter. So it'll be in line with the British relaxation. All the state borders are due to come down still in July, except Western Australia, because they've
declared independence.
Yeah, most of them are happy with it, but they are. It might come with conditions, the state borders coming down, that anyone who resides or has visited those Melbourne hotspots has to quarantine for 14 days. And Scott Morrison, in response to the panic buying again, told us once again, stop it. It's ridiculous.
Maybe people will listen this time.
Well, what's the old expression? You get fooled once. Fooled again. Shame on you.
Yeah. Yes, these people walk among us. We have had a poll here in New Zealand done. They're not that common. I've sent you the picture if you want to bring it up. But basically, the Labour Party was polling up to like nearly 60% in the recent polls where they had successfully squashed coronavirus. But since Simon Bridges was replaced as the leader of the National Party by Todd Muller, the National Party's had a bit of a bounce. So they're up 9. They're back comfortably in the high 30s now. Whether that will hold, who knows? But at least he hasn't been a total dud. For some reason, the Greens are doing okay. ACT Party has come up in a different poll on 3% as well. They seem to be stable there. New Zealand First could be out of Parliament. We don't know. But both the Greens and New Zealand First are really pushing for an electorate seat in New Zealand, which is a way to hang on to Parliament if you can't hit the 5% threshold. So that's the way that will go. What's incredible with this, I suppose, is Labour could still govern alone, which is very, very rare in New Zealand, even with a 9% drop in the polls. But we're still a long way out from the election, a long way being 3 months, just under 90 days down. Clearly there's going to, there can be a lot of volatility, and the polls are not accurate until election day. So we can see big swings like this, which shows that it's never really over, and the polls in a month or two could be entirely different to what we're seeing now.
From the past Australian and US elections.
Yeah, and New Zealand polls tend to be accurate, but that only really counts for the polls taken the week before the actual election. So, and by then half of the votes have already been cast, because we have early voting as well.
Is it the first new normal poll?
So we have had several polls during the lockdown period, which is why Labour was polling at 60%. This is the first poll since the National Party replaced their leader. That's really the only thing that's interesting about this poll, is that they replaced their leader. In terms of approvals, Jacinda is still above 50% approval. Oh, sorry, preferred Prime Minister. Her approval is much higher than that, but so she's still 54% preferred, and Todd Muller is 13%. That sounds really low, but Simon Bridges was at about 5% preferred Prime Minister. So even that a terrible number. He's gone from 0% preferred to 13% preferred in a single poll in less than a month. So it's not great, not terrible.
With the ACT Party, which is New Zealand's Libertarian Party, David Seymour, their MP, 3% above New Zealand First. I think that's their best in years.
In a long time,
and
yes.
It shows that when Libertarians get their act together and make bold stands, that pays off in the polls. So good on ACT and David Seymour.
So that's, they're definitely looking very happy with that, and they could get 4 MPs, which will be the most that they've had in a couple of elections. So, and I could say, sadly, there've been some changes on, if we've seen the Maori Party on there, they've just been endorsed by a different faction. There are actually 2 separatist parties going for that vote. They've actually combined, but the effect of that hasn't really shown up either, and the New Conservatives are still polling there at 1%, so sadly nothing special happening there in the polls, but we'll see how things go.
Got your work cut out for you.
That exactly. And I have just we had the launch conference there of the New Conservatives last week, which is why we didn't have the Friday show, and I have been at the AGM. I was elected onto the party board as well, so I'm happy with that.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And I'll be hopefully learning lots of things and seeing how things go the next couple of months, and we shall see what kind of results we can get.
I'll go on to some bad Australian economic news. Our JobKeeper wage subsidy ends in September, but companies and businesses are already making decisions about which jobs without JobKeeper they cannot sustain. Woolworths supermarkets announced that 1,300 jobs would go at their distribution centres in Sydney and Melbourne. They'd be replaced with more automation. Machines, they can't get coronavirus, though they can break down. That's their
They'll get a different kind of virus, I'm sure.
Oh, well, you don't want the toilet paper machine, like a handling machine, to break down.
No, that's right. At least if people have coronavirus, they can still keep making toilet paper. But
And Qantas, CEO Ellen Joyce announced that 6,000 jobs would have to go on top of 15,000 being already stood down. Alan Joyce is probably one of the most hated CEOs in Australia by both the left and the right. By the left because he's a union buster, and by the right because he led was one of the leaders of the same-sex marriage push in Australia, utilising the Qantas brand for that and also other social justice issues. But nobody can deny that he's a good businessman. He's been in the job for over a decade, and he has not taken a salary during the pandemic. And well,
definitely more clever than a lot of the people, especially politicians that we have here, promising they will take pay cuts and they're not actually following through. And I think the Air New Zealand CEO said he took like a 10% pay cut or something along those lines. But definitely sounds like somebody who is actually leading from the front.
I'd say not a sad economic news. The ABC, our public broadcaster, had their funding frozen by the Morrison government. So they've announced that 250 jobs will be slashed. They're closing down their ABC Life website, which was sort of their soft news junk website. So that's no great loss, and they're shutting down.
Are you sure that's not their main website?
Yeah, that's a good zinger there. And also their ABC comedy channel will be shutting down and rebranding, and which is, well, that's good news because, well, it was basically consumer fraud having an ABC comedy channel because it wasn't funny.
Yeah.
So that's got a lot of people on Twitter upset. And of course, they hold the news division hostage, the ABC management. They don't cut the fat around bloated production teams and that because they axed one of ABC Radio's flagship bulletins, the 7:45 a.m. news. But some good news is that our other airline, Virgin Australia, has been bought by US-based Bain Capital, which that's an interesting name.
Does it have a special meaning in Australia as well, or New Zealand's very famous murder case?
I'm referring to the Batman.
Oh, the
comics.
Batman one.
Yes,
Yeah. Of course, that makes sense from the American perspective. That makes perfect sense now. It is 2020. Anything can happen.
We've also had it's good that we're back on Fridays because it's a busy news day. The Australian Federal Police, on behalf of ASIO, our security agency, raided the home of a New South Wales Labor MP. Shadiqat Moslemain MLC, his Rockdale home. They tried to execute a search warrant on his parliamentary office, but because he's protected by privilege there, they couldn't get into it. He's been a member of the Legislative Council in New South Wales since 2009. He's had 9 privately funded trips to China since then, and there's countless footage of him praising Xi Jinping's leadership in China, helping them rise in the global geopolitical sphere, speaking out against the saboteurs of China and the anti-Chinese press, and praised their coronavirus response as well. So he's had his membership suspended. He's of Lebanese descent. And you recall that the other infamous New South Wales Labor senator whose career ended because of his yellings of the Chinese was Sam Dastyari, who was Iranian-born. So it's not necessarily the Chinese ethnic MPs who.
Yeah.
I know that.
Yeah. Interesting.
Because this is a Labor MP who's being raided as part of an espionage investigation. The response from the leftists on Twitter is to say, oh, but what about the LNP? What about Gladys Liu, the member for Chisholm, who's had associations with CCP front groups? Remember, this was their response about, we shouldn't forget, just because there's been a coronavirus outbreak in Melbourne suburbs, about Victorian Labor's branch stacking scandal, Adam Somniak, that was revealed on 60 Minutes 2 weeks ago. He's been kicked out of the Labor Party, but of course Twitter was like, oh, what about 60 Minutes investigating LNP people? Their immediate, the Labor cheer squad on Twitter, their immediate response is to deflect and say, yeah, but what about the other side?
Yeah, exactly. Without a need to look at responsibility. Obviously, I did see some chatter in New Zealand as well about the CCP. Obviously, we've talked about the ties that various parties and individuals in New Zealand have to the CCP as well. So if we're starting to see intelligence services raiding Labour MPs in Australia, who knows, maybe we could get some of that in New Zealand as well. Although we do have one ongoing serious fraud investigation to do with the CCP in New Zealand, whether or not that will be resolved by the election, we don't know.
Name of your office, the Serious Fraud.
Yeah, the
office.
Serious Fraud Office. They deal with very, very serious fraud. So that could be interesting. Somebody in the chat pointed out, by the way, the previous item talking about Virgin being bought by Bain Capital. Is Mitt Romney's outfit.
Oh.
So that the plot thickens. Mitt Romney is.
That's a real catch-22. Would you rather? Because the previous owners were a mix of Chinese, Arab. Who would you rather own it? A conglomerate of those or Mitt Romney?
Yeah, you're right. Well, yeah.
Is it still going to serve alcohol on flights?
Yeah, exactly.
That's a
There's no both of those. Yeah. Interesting. So
you're allowed to drink
anyway, we can.
your
I didn't
branch of Christianity or your denomination.
Yeah. More. Well, that not really. But we can't talk about that. We did this past week. I suppose we're getting close to the close of the show, and I would have to mention the police officers that were shot in West Auckland just over a week ago now, and they one of them was killed. He was 28-year-old officer Constable Hunt, and I believe it was his funeral today or yesterday. Which was a very tragic affair. It had actually been, I believe, over 11 years since the previous police officer was killed in the line of duty in New Zealand. This week they have run some very big raids against various different gangs around the country. So it looks like the New Zealand police are upping their activity. Not much has been revealed about who the shooter was, what kind of firearm was used. All of that's being kept under wraps. But the rumors are gang related and probably obviously illegal firearm, probably one of the semi-automatics that was banned by our parliament. And so it will be interesting to see how that develops. But that has been at least a tragic thing for New Zealand.
So clearly, the defund the police campaign hasn't taken off much
in
New Zealand,
that is
and hasn't
deterred
the New Zealand police from doing some tough work.
That's been the case. There have been some attempts to pin police brutality on the police in New Zealand now, but none of that is sticking now in the wake of this. So that's I suppose we shall see where it goes.
In New South Wales, there has been some recent appalling attacks on police officers when they're trying to apprehend aggressive and violent suspects, and that has been highlighted in the context of the defund the police, or what is that 1312 what is it, numerical thing that Antifa write up that people who are keeping our community safe shouldn't be treated like that. And the Australia and New Zealand police forces, they're nothing like those poorly trained, brute police departments in Democrat-controlled cities.
Absolutely, yeah. So.
I've noticed that the previous lefty lockdown lovies, they don't seem to care about continuing. Well, they're the ones that broke the lockdown for the BLM rallies, but they still seem to be preoccupied with racially purifying all of our popular culture.
Yes, we have had Eskimos announced to be renamed in New Zealand, and that was started in America. Eskimo pies, we've got lollies as well. There are Eskimos. So we talked yesterday, was last week, about the if you were too white, part of the whiteness agenda, basically a European or British colonial, then you got to get wiped out of New Zealand's history. And apparently the same thing is happening if you're an Eskimo. You are now no longer wanted, and Eskimos have got to go as well. So which is incredibly bizarre, because there's nothing out this, Eskimo is not a slur either, although some people try to claim it is, but it most definitely is not.
We have an Australian band called Eskimo Joe, which is full of white men, and so they're going to have to change their name because the Dixie Chicks announced today.
Yeah, they will.
That because they call themselves the Dixie Chicks because Dixie is slang for Southern white person. So even though they've been around for 20 plus years, they've just decided they're now going to be simply called the Chicks. But even that's a derogatory term for female
towards women. That's right.
David Linehelm got into trouble once for using the term chicks. So they need to just maybe just have no name.
Yeah, that's right. No more names anymore. We just all have to be. You get numbers assigned to you, and that's who you're going to be.
Or just call themselves, as they titled their documentary, "Shut Up and Sing." The Shut Up and Singers.
That should be the case, and it's basically it's a bizarre situation now where they're trying to figure out this new identity, and you got to be part of that new identity to fit, and the different groups, the different names that are being targeted and being wiped out, almost at random, and it's hard to know sort of who's going to fall on the wrong side and be offended and have to be renamed. And the very same people who basically were arguing, we need sort of a sugar tax and people shouldn't be eating all of these sweets and high sugar content foods, they need to be banned. It's now a case of like, no, it's fine, we'll just rename them. Like you're gonna, with we'll say, they're dangerous. Their names are dangerous. But don't worry if you eat too many and get diabetes, that's okay. But if you call them Eskimos, then that's the real violence.
Redskins and Chicos are going to be renamed by Nestle. Redskins are those red hard lollies, and Chicos are those brownish black soft lollies. So they said they didn't want to cause distress. Nestle. Well, it just came to me now. This is going to be I think a quite confronting one if they decide to rename it. What about Chinese crackers?
Yeah.
Because if you're seeing every name as race now, does that refer to basically a person who has mixed Chinese and white ethnicity?
And we can joke about it on the show. Like we were probably joking about one of these on the last show, but next week they will come up with something else. And the revolution must go on. Yeah. And so the revolution must find something every single week.
Our ABC, despite their cutbacks, they've still got enough time to try and put a show together to discuss whether chess is racist because white always goes first.
Yes. I did see that one. That's a good one as well. And again, one of the reasons to target chess is I suppose chess is part of the system. So chess must go. Right.
The king and the queen are the most powerful ones.
Exactly.
I mean, that is very hierarchical.
I'm surprised they didn't go for the sexist route as well. And so yeah, chess has got to go anyway. It doesn't matter how they target it, right? The chess has got to go.
It's also a very
whatever sticks.
Very restrictive game. I mean, some pieces can't move the same as others. There's not equal freedom of movement.
Yeah, and that is pretty much going to be it. They have to get rid of it. It has to go. It's all got to go. It's it doesn't matter what they want to go after. And so, I suppose on that topic, it's and since we're out of time, it's good to go into the final to wrap up with something a little bit more maybe positive.
Timely super chat, which will bring us into our next topic from Ham B for €2. Thank you so much, Ham B. What is your Parler account? Unite the Right. Yes, because Parler has really boomed in sign-ups and traffic this week. Ever since, Katie Hopkins, the British fearless, outspoken conservative commentator, she got banned permanently from Twitter. She had 1 million followers. She got retweeted and mentioned by President Trump. She's now opened a Parler account, and it's triggered this mass conservative migration there. So people like Gavin McGuinness, Laura Loomer are there. So is Sargon of Akkad, Tommy Robinson. I've created.
Basically they're all. It's pretty much happened now that suddenly everybody's there. And I remember looking at Parler a year ago, and we've talked about different old tech and old media, and none of them ever seem to really catch on. And for some strange reason, Parler, suddenly everybody is there. All the people who were banned, all the people who haven't been banned, but all of the conservative voices, all of kind of the normal mainstream right wing people, everybody's on there. And previously, these old tech sites have really suffered because only the crazy people join up.
It's basically Parler is now Gab, but without the anti-Semitism.
Pretty much, yeah. And that's really where Gab struggled, and mine's kind of struggled there too, and a bit niche. And that was kind of something I noticed. Everything's incredibly niche, and suddenly Parler looks like it's breaking through. Still niche in the sense that it's probably going to be only right wing, but at least it's broad right wing.
It's basically because Twitter jackass Dorsey, he's basically just pushed it too far in constantly restricting Trump's tweets or putting disclaimers on them. He couldn't help himself, I think, but do these things to Trump's account, and now he's created this exodus. It's his own fault.
Yeah, and it's quite interesting to see. So I am interested. I'm pretty keen to see what happens. We'll see.
I'm on Parler at Tim Wilms, so you can find me there. I launched mine on Thursday. The only other Australian alt media personality who's on there at the moment is Maddie's Modern Life. He quit Facebook ages ago. Oh, I just got a notification now that you followed me.
Yes, right now. I've just got it. I've been looking. I thought, was anybody from New Zealand, anybody from Australia on there? And I thought it was I know it had been a big thing in the UK and the United States. So we shall see. I don't do Twitter anyway. But we shall see. I never liked Twitter. So we'll see if I like this, how it goes. But I'm keen to try it out.
Well, as I said, once more people migrate there, it makes the platform
critical mass.
More engaging. So please follow us there, because what the Unshackled is quite active on Gab, and so am I. A lot of our followers have been there for the past year, and we recently surpassed 1,000 followers on Gab because there was that migration there. And so it's the migration there, the interaction, the followers, the people who come with you. Same with Telegram as well. We have very active Telegram channel and chat, and that's what makes it viable for us.
Yeah, and I very much enjoy Telegram. Not that I post much myself there, but following specific people especially ones who had been banned, but even people who haven't been banned usually would have very interesting Telegram channels. It would make it very easy just to follow their stuff. But it seems, we'll see where it goes. But in terms of
I've
Gab and Lines,
a whole bunch new followers just right now. Savnik, who's one of our regulars and also super chatters as well, has just followed me. Thank you, Savnik. That was a very impressive turnaround in follow request there.
We should try this more often. Just ask people to follow us. In fact, I should ask people to subscribe to my YouTube channel. I've stopped doing that for a long time. But if you're subscribe to the Right Minds YouTube channel, if you haven't yet subscribed, and especially if you ring that bell to get notifications, because I normally don't upload videos anyway, very rarely. So you will normally get the only notifications you should get are basically for the live streams. On the good days where Google allows them, where the Google overlords are kind to us and allow the live notifications to go out.
Yeah, the Google and Facebook overlords, they decide when they're going to make it easy for our followers to find us in their feed. We're still at their mercy when it comes to this. I suspect that we're shadow banned from Facebook. Again, it might have something to do with the fact that the XYZ got unpublished by Facebook for causing a national pylon against Waleed Ali and his wife Susan Carlin for their satire article, which I do agree it was not properly labelled, that he supported a Sudanese gang attack on a white teenager as a stand against white privilege and supremacy, and people thought it was real, and his wife Susan Carlin actually had to put out a tweet saying no, it's satire.
Yeah, so. And yeah, I always label the satire when I do it, because if you always do satire, it's fine. Everybody knows the Babylon Bee is satire, and it's funny when people don't know the Babylon Bee is satire. But if you're normally a serious site, especially in this day and age where it's almost impossible to spot satire, it's become very important to label it, because even the worst satire you could come up with starts to sound plausible.
Yes, there's constant examples of it, and the Babylon Bee, a lot of their satire is just basically statement of fact. Like the one that springs to mind the most is that Christian Library doesn't have Drag Queen Story Hour, just has books, which is that's a fact.
Yeah, but it's almost in a sense where you get to the reverse satire, where they can simply state incredibly obvious things that almost sound crazy to say now, or at least incredibly brave to say ordinary things, which is a testament to how absolutely bizarre the clown world has gotten.
We've got one more super chat before we wrap up. We have gone 10 minutes over time, but it's our first show again in a week and a half, so I think we can go a bit over. Gareth Jones, New Zealand, $16.99. Thank you, Gareth. Is he one of your Right Minds crew as well? The name sounds familiar.
I don't recognize that name at all, Matt.
So he says, hello, I suppose you know about this, but have you tried putting and 3 numbers between 100 and 999 followed by the words new cases into Google search? Very interesting. I think he's referring to coronavirus cases.
Yeah. I've seen that. You can type in whatever numbers, and that number. Well, I would think at least there have been news reports with just about every single number of cases, because, well, I don't really need to explain all of it, but you could try it out, and it's quite I suppose quite fun to see, but it's not that radical in my opinion, or unexpected.
All right, that brings us to the end of tonight's show. So thank you everyone who's watched in both live chats and to the super chatters as well, where the sporadic and change in broadcast times has ended now. We're always going to be back now 6 p.m. Fridays Melbourne
8 p.m.
time.
New Zealand. Yeah.
Yep. So we're back at the normal time.
Yep. I mean, there will be cases where we temporarily switch back to the Tuesday, but We were supposed to do a Tuesday this week, which we announced last week, and then Tim remembered something really important, which is why we're back to the Friday.
An anniversary.
Yeah, that's right. And so, yeah, we'll definitely be back next Friday. We don't have anything planned. So until then, and you can go to rightminds.nz for my content or to the bfd.co.nz. Make sure you follow me on Parler at Dieuwe. And you can go to rightminds.nz/donate as well if you'd like to help just keep the website running. And other than that, I will be back next week.
Yep, and as I've said on my Wilms Front and Uncockables this week, starting next Monday, Wilms Front will be back to twice a week, 6:30 p.m. Mondays and Wednesdays. Have to finish the show before 8 p.m. because the XYZ conference is on 8 p.m. Melbourne time to 10 p.m. That'll be running Monday to Friday, which means there'll be no Uncockables that week before, but two Wilms Fronts, two very big guests lined up, which will be very exciting. I feel that I can sustain 2 shows a week again now that sort of the move out of the studio and setting up here at my home studio is complete now. I can just be at the desk/studio all the time now, so I'm finally back into full engine capacity, which is great.
Can you announce any of the special guests yet, or is it going to be a wait and see?
Yeah, I'll keep my cards close to my chest.
I might know, and they might be good. That's all I can say.
Yeah. All right, have a good weekend, everybody. If you're a Melburnian, stay safe from coronavirus and Dan Andrews and his what they're called community engagement team members now.
And wherever you live, stay safe from the government.
Yeah.
All right, good night, and see you next week.
See ya.